I had no idea that picking up my daughter-in-law's coat from the dry cleaner would change everything. It seemed like just another errand, a simple favor. But when I walked in, the owner, someone I'd known for years, stopped me. He pulled me aside and whispered, "Take your grandchildren and leave before dawn." I was stunned. I didn't know what he was talking about. Why would I need to leave? He then showed me a small plastic bag, one that looked innocent at first, but when he opened it, everything shifted. Inside were a bank receipt for millions of dollars and a photo of my two grandchildren. They were marked with angry red circles. I froze. My heart sank. What was going on? What had Chloe, my daughter-in-law, been hiding? I didn't know if I was in danger or if my grandchildren were, but I knew one thing for sure. My life had just changed in a way I couldn't understand. The mornings in Marigold Bay always begin the same way, quiet, damp, and covered in fog, so thick you can't tell where the sea ends and the sky begins. My little wooden house sits at the edge of the bay, the kind of place where the salt in the air clings to your skin and every sound seems softer, like it's been swallowed by the mist. After my husband passed away, a literature professor who used to read poetry aloud every evening, life became a long stretch of ordinary days. I kept busy with my grandchildren, Ella and Lucas, while my son Daniel was often away for work. He's an aerospace engineer, brilliant but always in motion, never in one place long enough to notice the small cracks forming in his home. It was just me and the children most days. Ella would sit by the window drawing, while little Lucas played with his toy trains across the wooden floor. Their laughter filled the silence their parents left behind. I told myself that was enough, that watching over them was my purpose now. Then there was Natalie, my daughter-in-law. She was the kind of woman people liked instantly. Warm smile, perfect manners, every word polished like it had been rehearsed. She called me Mom with such sweetness that it almost felt real, but underneath I always sensed something. Distant. Not cold, exactly, just calculated. The kind of warmth that turns off the moment you stop looking. We were never close, not in the way I'd hoped we would be. Still, I tried. I helped her with the kids, cooked dinner when she worked late, and kept my questions to myself. Every family has its boundaries, and I've learned the hard way not to cross them. That morning was no different from any other, until she came into the kitchen, dressed neatly, phone in hand, her voice too calm for the chaos of getting ready for work. "Mom," she said, setting her purse down on the counter, "could you do me a favor? I forgot to pick up my coat from Linwood's. The dry cleaner, it's just by the bakery." She smiled like it was a small thing, something anyone could ask. I didn't think twice. "Of course," I told her. "You'll freeze without it." She laughed softly. "You're an angel, Mom. I'll owe you one." The way she said it, it was light, teasing, but something about her tone didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the way she avoided eye contact as she grabbed her coffee and hurried out the door, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. Maybe it was the faint tremor in her voice when she said goodbye to the kids. The house felt unusually still after she left. Ella hummed as she colored at the table. Lucas was building his train track by the window. I stood at the sink, staring out through the fog, watching it roll in thicker from the bay. I remember thinking how beautiful it looked, soft and endless, and yet how easily it could hide things. When the clock struck 9, I put on my old beige coat, tied a scarf around my neck, and grabbed Natalie's claim ticket from the fridge. Linwood's dry cleaning was only a few streets away, just past the Lighthouse Road. Mr. Linwood, the owner, had been a friend of my husband's for years. A quiet man, polite, always wearing that same faded cap. I hadn't seen him much since the funeral. I figured I'd pick up the coat, stop by the bakery for some bread, maybe chat for a minute about old times. Nothing about that morning suggested that my world was about to tilt. The fog outside was calm, the air smelled faintly of rain, and the children's laughter echoed behind me as I stepped out the door. It was just an errand, a simple favor, a daughter-in-law asking her mother-in-law for help. But looking back now, I can still feel the weight of that moment, the way the doorknob felt cool in my hand, how the mist brushed my face like a warning. I had no idea that I was walking straight into the first crack of something much bigger, because sometimes it's the smallest things that open the door to the biggest storms. Emotional hook. I thought it was just a small favor, but sometimes the smallest things are the beginning of every storm. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside Linwood's dry cleaning. The small shop looked exactly as it always had. Dim light from a single bulb, glass door smudged with fingerprints and the familiar, heavy scent of detergent that clung to the air. Steam drifted from an old pressing machine in the corner, curling like ghosts through the sunlight that fought to break through the fog outside. "Morning, Mr. Linwood," I said softly. He turned around slowly, his glasses slipping down his nose. For a moment he didn't seem to recognize me. Then his face shifted, first surprise, then something else, something that looked a lot like fear. "Mrs. Hayes," he whispered, his voice rough, uncertain. You're here for the coat, right?" I nodded, pulling the crumpled yellow claim ticket from my pocket. "My daughter-in-law's. She said she left it here a few days ago." He took the slip from my hand without a word and disappeared into the back room. I waited, tapping my fingers on the glass counter, thinking about what to cook for the children's dinner. The old clock ticked above the doorway, its sound sharp in the stillness. When he returned, he was holding the coat wrapped in a thin plastic cover, but instead of handing it to me, he paused. His eyes darted toward the street outside, then to the young worker ironing shirts near the window. Finally, he said quietly, "Could you step over here for a moment?" Something in his voice made my stomach tighten. He pulled aside the faded curtain behind the counter and motioned for me to follow him into the back room. The air there was thick and hot, filled with the hiss of steam and the metallic smell of iron. I expected him to say something about a payment issue or a lost receipt, but when I saw his hands shaking, my heart began to race. "Mr. Linwood, what's wrong?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small transparent plastic bag. Inside was a folded document and a photograph. When he placed it on the counter, I felt the world tilt. "This," he said, his voice breaking, "this was in your daughter-in-law's coat pocket." I stared at the bag. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper inside was a bank transfer receipt, international, marked with an official red stamp. The amount read $23,000 USD. I blinked, thinking I must have read it wrong. $2.3 million. Why would Natalie have something like this? And then I saw the photo. It was a picture of my two grandchildren, Ella and Lucas, sitting on the porch last summer, smiling in the sunlight. But someone with a trembling, angry hand, had drawn two rough red circles around their faces. The circles weren't neat. They looked rushed, violent. I felt the blood drain from my face. My knees almost gave way. Who did this?" I whispered. Mr. Linwood looked at me with a kind of horror that made me want to run. "I don't know," he said. "But the moment I found it, I knew something wasn't right. I haven't told anyone, not even the police. I didn't know who I could trust." He leaned closer, his breath unsteady. "Mrs. Hayes, listen carefully. You need to take the children and leave town. Don't wait. Don't ask questions, just go." I stared at him, my mind spinning. "Leave? Why? What are you saying?" His eyes darted again toward the door. "If this belongs to her, if she's involved in whatever this is, you're all in danger. That woman, your daughter-in-law, she's hiding something. And it's not small. Please, I'm begging you. Get those kids out before she realizes this is missing." I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry. All I could hear was the ticking of the clock from the other room and the faint sound of the ironing machine hissing in the background. Natalie's face flashed in my mind. Her calm smile, the soft way she said "Mom," the gentle kiss she gave Ella that morning before heading to work. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Maybe it's a mistake," I stammered. "A mix-up. Someone else's coat." He shook his head firmly. "No, ma'am, it's hers. I checked the tag twice." My throat tightened. The edges of my vision blurred. For a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Mr. Linwood placed a trembling hand on my shoulder. "You need to promise me you'll go," he said. "Before sunset, if you can. And don't tell anyone you came here, not even her." I looked down at the bag in my hands, the red ink glaring like a wound through the plastic. My fingers clenched around it as though I could squeeze the truth out of it. Finally, I nodded. I'll go," I whispered. He exhaled, his shoulders slumping in relief. "Good. God bless you, Mrs. Hayes. And those children." I turned to leave, the coat draped over my arm, the plastic bag pressed against my chest like a secret I didn't ask for. As I stepped out, the bell above the door rang again, sharp and hollow. The fog outside had thickened, swallowing the street in white. The air felt colder than before, biting through my coat, through my skin. I could barely see the outline of the road ahead. I started walking, the bag still hidden in my pocket, my heart pounding in my ears. Every step felt heavier, every breath shorter. The sound of my shoes against the wet pavement was the only thing grounding me to reality. When I reached the corner, I stopped and looked back. Through the fog, I could just make out the faded sign, Linwood's Dry Cleaning, since 1979. The lights inside flickered once, then went out. I don't remember how long I stood there before turning home, but I remember one thing with perfect clarity. The world suddenly felt colder, quieter, and full of shadows I hadn't noticed before. For the first time in years, I was afraid to go home. Emotional hook. I stepped out of the shop and felt the cold bite deeper than ever before. The fog was so thick I couldn't tell what was real anymore, and what was a lie. When I came back from Linwood's, the fog had thickened until it felt like the whole town was drowning in silence. The lights from the bay were faint, barely visible through the white haze. Every step toward my house felt heavier, as though the air itself didn't want me to return. By the time I opened the door, it was already dark. The old clock on the wall ticked softly, each second echoing through the empty rooms. I hung my coat by the door, set down the basket of groceries I never bought, and tried to steady my breathing. The children were asleep. Their toys were still scattered across the living room floor. Tiny cars, a doll with a missing shoe, a coloring book half open. The small, ordinary mess of family life. I wanted to freeze that moment forever, just as it was. Before everything started to change, I stood in front of the fireplace for a long time, staring at the photo frame of my husband. The warm yellow light from the lamp fell across his face, captured mid-laugh in a moment that felt a lifetime ago. He would have known what to do, I thought. He always did. He had a way of seeing things for what they really were, even when I didn't want to. I whispered, "What should I do, Tom?" But of course there was no answer, only the soft ticking of the clock, relentless and calm. My hands were trembling when I took Natalie's coat out of its plastic cover. It was a fine wool piece, dark gray, elegant, expensive. The kind of thing she wore when she wanted to look effortlessly perfect. I laid it out carefully on the table. The smell of detergent still lingered, sharp and sterile. For a while, I just stared at it, afraid to touch it again. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe Mr. Linwood had misunderstood. Maybe this was all nothing. But the memory of that photo, the red circles over Ella and Lucas, wouldn't leave me. Finally, I ran my fingers along the lining. That's when I felt it. A faint ridge, a place where the stitching was slightly thicker than the rest. A new seam. I reached for my sewing scissors from the drawer, the same pair I'd used for years to mend the children's clothes. My hands shook as I cut along the tiny row of fresh stitches. The threads snapped softly, one by one, until the seam opened. Something small and hard fell into my palm. It was a USB drive, black, plain, no label, no markings. Just a thin strip of red thread tied around it, like someone had wanted to mark it, to remember it. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I sat down, staring at it under the yellow light. The little object seemed to pulse in my hand like a heartbeat. I didn't know what was inside, but somehow, deep down, I knew it wasn't something meant to be found. I looked at the coat again, then at the photo of my husband on the mantelpiece. My voice barely came out as I whispered, "What did you get yourself into, Natalie?" The USB felt heavier the longer I held it. My mind ran wild. Bank transfers, the photo of the kids. Now this? None of it made sense, yet every instinct in me screamed that it was all connected. Should I plug it in? Should I call the police? Or should I just do what Mr. Linwood said? Take the children and leave before it's too late. I stood up and began to pace. The clock ticked louder now, like it was keeping count of my hesitation. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, thick and motionless. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then went silent again. I went to check on the children. Ella was curled up under her blanket, one hand still clutching her doll. Lucas had kicked off his covers, his small chest rising and falling as he slept. Their faces were peaceful, untouched by any of this. My throat tightened. I wanted to keep them in that world, safe, unknowing, untouched. When I came back to the kitchen, I placed the USB inside a small tin box and hid it in the drawer beneath the old cutlery, under a pile of faded dish towels. I sat down and listened to the house breathe, the old wood creaking, the wind brushing against the walls, the clock ticking like a slow heartbeat. The more I tried to calm myself, the more I felt it. Something closing in, something I couldn't yet name. Natalie would come home soon. She would walk through that door with her soft voice and perfect smile. She would ask about the kids, maybe even thank me for helping with the coat. Would I be able to look at her the same way? The sound of a car outside made me jump. Headlights swept briefly across the curtains. I froze, holding my breath, waiting. The car passed. Silence again. I looked toward the drawer where I had hidden the USB. It was strange how such a small object could hold so much power. It felt like I was keeping someone's darkest secret, something that didn't belong in my hands. I thought about calling Daniel, but what would I even say? Your wife might be hiding something dangerous? He would think I'd lost my mind. Instead, I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow from the lamp near the photo frame. The house fell into shadows. I stood there for a long time, listening. The clock kept ticking. Each sound felt heavier than the last. Tick, tock, tick, like time itself was warning me. Outside, the fog thickened again, pressing against the windows like a living thing. The street lamp flickered, dimming and brightening, as if unsure whether to stay alive. I sat by the table, my eyes on the drawer, the faint outline of the coat still visible in the dark, and for the first time that night, I realized I wasn't just scared of what might happen next. I was scared of what I already knew. The moment I decided to call Martha, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The old landline sat on the counter, its cord tangled like a memory of easier days. I hadn't spoken to her in months, maybe a year, but she was the only person I could think of. Someone who knew me before all of this, before the fear. The line rang once, twice. Then her voice came through, rough and familiar. Margaret? The way she said my name broke something inside me. I didn't even realize I was crying until I heard the sound of my own breath. Martha, I whispered, I need help. There was a short pause, and then her voice softened. Tell me what happened. I can't, I said, my voice trembling. Not yet. Martha, I need to get out of here. Tonight. For a long second, all I could hear was the faint static on the line. Then, quietly but firmly, she said, All right. You don't need to explain. My brother's a night driver. Long routes, no questions. I'll call him. He'll come for you. Take the children and whatever you can't afford to lose. Nothing else. I closed my eyes, my chest tightening with both relief and fear. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you, Martha. She sighed, the sound full of concern. Margaret, whatever you're running from, promise me you'll be careful. There's no turning back once you go. I know, I said. There's nothing left to turn back to. After we hung up, I stood there for a while, my hand still resting on the receiver. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock in the living room. That steady rhythm, it sounded different now. Not peaceful, not familiar. It was counting down. I went upstairs to pack. The children were still asleep, their faces calm and untroubled. I envied them for that. I folded their clothes, small sweaters, socks, the pink pajamas Ella loved, Lucas's favorite blue blanket. I didn't know where we were going or for how long. I just knew we had to move fast. In my own room, I pulled an old suitcase from under the bed and started filling it. Clothes, the USB hidden in a tin box, my husband's watch, some cash, the family photo album. Then I stopped. On the nightstand next to my reading glasses was the framed photo of Tom. His smile was kind, steady. He'd taken that photo the summer before he died, insisting on setting up the tripod by the bay. He said the light was perfect that morning. Now that same smile looked like a farewell. I held the photo to my chest, pressing my forehead against the glass. You'd know what to do, I whispered. You always did. A sudden noise made me freeze. The sound of a car engine outside. My heart jumped. I rushed to the window, pulling the curtain just a little, but it was only the mail truck passing through the fog. Still, the fear wouldn't leave. The mist outside was thicker than ever, curling against the window pane like smoke. The lamplight from the street flickered, swallowed by the fog. It felt like the world was holding its breath. I went back to packing, books, my husband's old journal. A few of Ella's drawings folded carefully into a pocket. Every item felt like a piece of the life I was about to leave behind. When I reached for another sweater, my fingers brushed the coat, Natalie's coat, still draped over the chair. I stared at it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to never see it again. But another part, the part that couldn't stop asking questions, told me to keep it. Whatever secrets it carried, I wasn't done with them yet. The sound of the clock downstairs echoed through the quiet house. Tick-tock, tick, each beat sharper than the last. I felt like it was pushing me, urging me to move faster. I packed food for the children, a few bottles of water, their small shoes. Then I went to the living room. The lamp cast a warm glow over the photos on the wall. Birthdays, vacations, ordinary days. I touched each frame gently, as if saying goodbye. The last one was of all four of us: Daniel, Natalie, the kids, and me. Natalie's smile looked perfect, but now I could see the coldness behind her eyes. How long had she been lying to us? I picked up my husband's lighter from the shelf. It still worked. The small flame flickered briefly before I snapped it shut. I didn't know why, but I slipped it into my pocket. Maybe it made me feel less helpless. Outside, the wind started to rise, making the branches tap against the windows like fingers knocking. The house seemed to whisper with every creak, every gust. I tried to ignore it. When I finally closed the last suitcase, I looked around the room one last time. Everything felt distant now, like I was already gone. Then came the soft ring of my phone. Martha's voice on the other end was urgent but steady. "He's on his way, Margaret. A gray van, no markings, parked 2 streets down near the old gas station. Leave the lights off when you go, and hurry." I whispered, "Thank you, Martha." There was a pause, then her voice dropped to a whisper. "You're doing the right thing." When the call ended, I slipped the phone into my coat pocket. My reflection in the window startled me. Pale, tired, eyes hollow. I barely recognized myself. I checked on the children once more. Ella stirred when I lifted her, her small arms looping around my neck. Lucas murmured in his sleep, clutching his blanket. "Shh," I whispered. "We're just going for a ride." The fog outside was so dense that the world beyond my porch had disappeared. As I stepped out, the air was cold and heavy, the kind that bites through your clothes. Every sound, my footsteps, the creak of the wooden steps, felt louder than it should. Behind me, the house stood in silence. Only the faint glow of the clock through the window remained. Each tick was a reminder I was out of time. I tightened my grip on the children and took a deep breath. Somewhere out there in the fog, a van waited. Safety, or something close to it. As we walked away, I looked back one last time. The house seemed smaller now, swallowed by the mist. For a moment, I thought I saw Tom's shadow in the window, just standing there watching over us. Maybe it was only my mind trying to make sense of everything. Maybe it was goodbye. I turned away before I could change my mind. Sometimes running isn't cowardice. It's the only way left to protect what you love. It was 1 a.m. when I heard the low hum of an engine outside. Through the window, faint headlights cut through the fog like tired eyes. Ray, Martha's brother, had arrived. I opened the door quietly so the hinges wouldn't creak. The cold air rushed in, sharp enough to sting my lungs. Ray stepped out of the van, tall and broad-shouldered, his face half hidden by the collar of his worn jacket. "Mrs. Hayes?" he said, keeping his voice low. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm Ray Quinn. Martha told me you needed a ride." "No questions asked." "Thank you," I said, "truly." He gave a small nod, then looked past me at the house. "You ready?" I hesitated just for a second, my eyes falling on the front door, the porch light flickering faintly. "As ready as I'll ever be." Ella clutched her old doll against her chest, her sleepy eyes blinking in confusion. Lucas was limp in my arms, his head resting on my shoulder. I could feel his small breaths against my neck, steady and innocent. "Cold," Ella murmured softly. "I know, sweetheart," I said, brushing her hair away from her face. "We'll be warm soon." Ray opened the back door of the van, and I climbed in with the children. The seats smelled faintly of tobacco and rain. He closed the door gently, careful not to make a sound. Then, without another word, he started the engine. The van rolled slowly down the empty street, its tires crunching over the gravel. The fog was so thick it swallowed everything beyond the headlights. It was as if we were driving through a cloud, the whole world erased behind us. From the back seat, I looked out through the window, my home shrinking into a blur of light and shadow. The clock tower at the end of the road struck once, echoing across the bay. When we turned the corner, I caught one last glimpse of the house. The living room window was dark, but the upstairs light, the one in Natalie's room, was still on. My chest tightened. Through the fogged glass, I saw her silhouette. She was standing by the window, phone in hand, her lips moving fast, her body tense. She hadn't noticed the van slipping away down the street. She hadn't noticed us leaving. I couldn't hear her, but I could imagine her voice. Cold, urgent, the way it always was when she was hiding something. For a long moment I watched her, and in that stillness I understood something. She wasn't asleep, she wasn't unaware, she was waiting. For someone. Or something. A chill went down my spine. "Everything all right?" Ray asked from the driver's seat, glancing at me through the rear view mirror. I forced a breath. "Just drive." He didn't ask again. The road curved along the edge of Marigold Bay, and the sea appeared faintly through the mist, a flat gray sheet blending into the sky. Streetlights flickered as we passed, disappearing into the fog behind us like dying stars. Inside the van it was quiet. The only sounds were the engine and Ella's soft breathing as she drifted back to sleep. I pulled a blanket over her and looked down at Lucas. He was still fast asleep, his hand curled around a small toy car. I pressed a kiss to his forehead, whispering, "You're safe, my love." But the word safe felt fragile in my mouth. I turned my gaze back toward the window. The town was vanishing. The grocery store where I used to buy apples, the church bell tower, even the silhouette of the school, all faded into the fog. For years, I had believed Marigold Bay was a place where nothing truly bad could happen. But tonight, I realized that evil doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it lives under your own roof, smiling at your children, calling you mom. Ray turned on the wipers, clearing a small arc of visibility on the windshield. "Where are we heading?" he asked. "Charleston," I said quietly. "It's the only place I can think of." He nodded. "Long drive. We'll make it by morning." The fog grew thicker as we drove. I leaned my head against the window, watching the lights smear into pale ribbons. My reflection looked ghost-like. Tired eyes, pale skin, lips pressed into a line. I wondered what would happen when Natalie discovered the coat was gone. The USB, the photo, everything. Would she panic, or would she already know what I'd found? The thought made my pulse quicken. Ray broke the silence. "Martha said to tell you she'll keep her phone on all night. If anything goes wrong, call her." I nodded, though I couldn't imagine what worse would even mean now. Behind us, Marigold Bay disappeared completely. Just a faint glow in the mist. I held Ella's hand and looked forward. The road stretched endlessly ahead, swallowed by the white night. Somewhere behind those fog-shrouded streets, Natalie was still awake. Still standing by that window. She had no idea that her secret, the one she'd buried so carefully, was leaving town with me. She didn't know that. At that very moment, her secret was leaving town with me. Dawn broke over Savannah in a quiet hush. The fog was lighter here, tinged with gold from the rising sun. From the riverfront, the morning mist rose like smoke from some distant fire, wrapping the old city in a fragile glow. For the first time in what felt like days, I wasn't running. I was just breathing. Ray dropped us off before sunrise, just as the sky began to pale. I thanked him quietly, and he drove away without asking a single question, just a wave, a silent understanding between two strangers who'd crossed paths in a secret they'd never share. The Blue Magnolia Inn stood at the corner of Whitaker Street, its faded blue shutters half open, its front porch framed by overgrown ivy. It used to be a convent, the owner told me later, a place for prayer and quiet redemption. The wooden floors still creaked like old hymns, and the air smelled faintly of candle wax and damp pine. I signed the ledger under a false last name, just Margaret H. The woman at the desk didn't ask anything. Maybe she recognized the kind of silence that shouldn't be disturbed. Our room was small but warm. Cream curtains filtered the sunlight, and through the tall window I could see the Savannah River gliding by, slow and steady, as if it had all the time in the world. Ella climbed onto the bed, holding her doll. "Grandma, are we going to live here now?" she asked, her eyes wide, full of that mixture of hope and worry only children can have. I smiled, brushing her hair back. "Yes, sweetheart, at least until the sky feels safe again." She nodded, satisfied with that answer, and began arranging her doll's tiny shoes on the pillow. Lucas was already asleep, curled up against his blanket, his little chest rising and falling peacefully. For a long moment I just stood there watching them. The morning light caught their faces, soft and unguarded. It hit me that this was the first dawn I'd seen without fear since we left Marigold Bay. But peace has a way of feeling fragile when you've lived too long with danger. After settling the children, I went to the old writing desk near the window. The wood was scratched and uneven, but the phone on top worked. I opened my worn address book, the one I hadn't touched in years, its pages yellowed and corners bent. My finger paused on a name I hadn't spoken aloud in a decade, Reverend Thomas Cole. He had been the chaplain at the school where I taught literature years ago, a man who never judged, never rushed to preach, but listened. He'd been there when Tom passed away, when grief hollowed me out. If anyone could help me now, it was him. I dialed the number, heart pounding. It rang twice before a warm, familiar voice answered. Older now, but unmistakable. St. Bridget's Church, this is Father Cole speaking. I exhaled, my voice trembling. Father, it's Margaret Hayes. I don't know if you remember me. There was a pause, then a quiet chuckle of disbelief. Margaret, of course I remember. It's been, 10 years? You used to leave lemon cake on my desk after Sunday service. Despite everything, I smiled. You still remember that? I remember everything about the people who leave kindness behind, he said softly. Then his tone changed, gentle but perceptive. Your voice sounds different. Is everything all right? I hesitated, staring out the window at the glimmer of the river. The words came out before I could stop them. No, Father, everything is wrong. Where are you? He asked immediately. In Savannah, with the children. Are you safe? I looked at Ella and Lucas, sleeping under the pale morning light. For now. Then that's enough, he said. Come by the church when you can. It's not far from the river. We'll talk there. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Thank you, Father. I didn't know who else to call. His voice softened. Sometimes God doesn't answer through miracles, Margaret. He sends people. That's how he speaks. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The room was filled with the quiet hum of the morning, the distant toll of church bells, the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway below, the steady breathing of my grandchildren. Outside, the fog was beginning to lift. Sunlight poured slowly through the curtains, touching the floor, the bed, the walls, like it was reclaiming the room from the night. I took the USB out of my coat pocket and placed it on the desk. Its black surface caught the light, small but heavy with everything it carried. I didn't know what I would tell Father Cole yet, or if I could even bring myself to open the truth of what I'd found. But I knew one thing. Whatever came next, I couldn't face it alone anymore. Savannah felt different from Marigold Bay. The air was thicker, the streets older, but there was something sacred in the quiet here, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this was where things would begin to heal. Ella murmured something in her sleep, and I looked over at her. She was smiling faintly, dreaming of something sweet. I hoped her dreams stayed untouched by the darkness that had followed us. The light climbed higher across the walls, pale gold against the cracked paint. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe without fear. Maybe this was what the first light after a long storm felt like. Not peace, but the fragile beginning of it. The church smelled of wax and cedar, the kind of scent that carried both memory and comfort. St. Bridget's stood on a quiet corner near the river. Stone walls, stained glass windows, and wooden pews that had seen generations of prayers. It felt timeless, untouched by whatever chaos lived beyond its doors. Father Cole waited for me near the altar, a single candle burning beside him. His face, lined with years and kindness, softened when he saw me. "Margaret," he said gently, walking forward, "you look tired." "I am," I admitted, my voice breaking just slightly. "I don't even know where to begin." He nodded, his tone calm and steady. "Begin anywhere. The truth doesn't care about order, it only cares that it's spoken." So I told him everything. About the coat, the photo, the money, the USB, the fog. About Natalie's room still lit in the middle of the night. About the way fear feels when it stops being a moment and starts being a life. He listened without interrupting, hands clasped loosely in front of him. The candlelight flickered across his face, catching in his eyes, gentle but sharp with understanding. When I finished, he let out a slow breath. "Margaret," he said softly, "your son will need you to stay clear-headed now. Whatever this is, it's bigger than what one person can face alone. You've already done the hardest thing, leaving. Now it's time to understand what you've been running from." He paused, then turned toward the far end of the church. "There's someone I want you to meet." From the small doorway by the choir loft, a woman appeared. Early 30s, carrying a laptop bag and wearing a navy blazer over a white shirt. Her steps were confident, though her eyes were warm, almost familiar. "This is Amelia Grant," Father Cole said. "She used to be one of your students back when she was just a girl who loved poetry and justice in equal measure." I blinked, studying her face. "Amelia Grant. From the class of 2008? She smiled. "The very one. You once told me that words could change the world if you used them at the right time." A small laugh escaped me, shaky but real. I said that? You did, she said, setting her bag on the pew. And you added, there's no truth too late to tell. That line stuck with me. She opened her laptop, motioning for me to sit beside her. Father Cole dimmed the overhead lights until only the candle near the altar remained, its glow soft but steady. Father Cole told me you found a USB, Amelia said. May I? I nodded, sliding it from my pocket. It looked harmless now, just a small piece of plastic and metal, but in my hand it felt heavier than before. Amelia inserted it into her laptop. The screen came alive, cold blue light flickering across her face. Rows of numbers filled the screen, spreadsheets, wire transfers, encrypted files. She clicked through carefully, her expression tightening. These are international transfers. Large sums, millions, all routed through shell companies. She scrolled further, opening a folder marked Documents. Inside were scanned passports, dozens of them. Children, different countries, different faces, each file labeled with a name, an age, and a destination. My stomach turned. What is this? Her fingers hovered over the trackpad. Trafficking, or something like it. Father Cole crossed himself silently. The candle flickered as if the air itself had tensed. Then Amelia opened another document, an export ledger. At the top, stamped in red, Lane Exports Leontold. This company was investigated 3 years ago, she murmured. Illegal shipments, missing paperwork. They were suspected of moving something or someone through cargo lines. I felt my breath catch. And the name? Amelia's voice dropped. It's here, under the management list, Natalie Brooks. The name hit me like a blow. Natalie's maiden name. For a moment, everything in the room seemed to blur. The candlelight, the faint hum of the church heater, even the ticking of Father Cole's old clock, all of it faded into the same low roar of disbelief. My mind tried to push the name away, to make it belong to another woman, another story, but the face that came back wasn't a stranger's. It was hers, the smile that never quite reached her eyes, the voice that always sounded rehearsed. I whispered almost to myself, she used her maiden name. Amelia looked at me, her eyes filled with something between pity and anger. She didn't want it traced back to your family. Father Cole stepped closer, his tone calm but weighted. Margaret, listen to me. You did the right thing coming here. This is no longer just about your daughter-in-law. It's something larger. But we will face it with care. Together. I stared at the screen again. The names of children, the lines of transfers, the red circles in that photo flashing back in my mind. The walls of the church felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. I don't understand, I whispered. How could she live in my home, hold my grandchildren, smile at my son, and do this? Cole put a hand on my shoulder. Evil doesn't always enter a house by breaking down the door, Margaret. Sometimes it's invited in. Amelia closed the laptop, the soft click echoing in the silence. We'll report this, but carefully. The wrong move could tip her off. I'll start by tracing these transactions. I nodded numbly. My body felt present, but my mind was somewhere else, stuck in the image of Natalie standing by that window, the phone pressed to her ear, her eyes so calm. The truth had finally begun to reveal itself, and it was worse than betrayal, it was familiarity. I turned to Father Cole and Amelia, my voice low, steady. I thought I was running away from danger, but it's in my blood now, isn't it? Neither of them answered. The candle between us flickered again, then steadied. 2 small flames in the dark, holding back the night. I found the suitcase on the highest shelf of the wardrobe, the one I hadn't opened in years. It was my husband's, Tom's, old leather case. The corners were worn smooth, the handle cracked from age. It still smelled faintly of cedar and the faint cologne he used to wear, like he'd just stepped out for a moment and forgotten to take it with him. For days, I'd avoided touching it. I told myself I was too busy, too tired, that it wasn't the time. But tonight, after what Amelia had shown me, I couldn't sleep. The weight of the truth had settled into my bones cold and heavy, and somewhere deep down, I think I was searching for him, for the steadiness he carried even in chaos. The children were asleep in the next room. The inn was quiet, the only sound the hum of the old radiator and the faint creak of the floorboards shifting with the night. I pulled the suitcase down and set it on the bed. The leather groaned softly as the clasps opened. Inside were things he'd packed away before the cancer took him: neatly folded shirts, a few handwritten notes, a small wooden box that once held his cufflinks. And at the very bottom, beneath a faded scarf, there was an envelope. It was yellowed, edges curled, sealed with a bit of old wax that had half cracked over time. On the front, in his handwriting, were the words, "For Margaret, when the time comes." My heart stopped for a moment. I sat down slowly, my hands trembling as I turned the envelope over. The seal broke with a soft snap, like the sound of something small and sacred ending. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in his neat, careful script. "My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, I can only hope you are still the brave, stubborn woman I fell in love with. Life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. There may come a day when Daniel is hurt or betrayed. If that day comes, use what I've saved. There's a safety deposit key taped behind this letter. The funds there are for you and for our grandchildren. You'll know when to act. Protect them, Maggie. Protect them the way you always have, with your heart, your mind, and your courage. And remember, the storms will pass. They always do. Tom." By the time I reached the last line, I couldn't see the words anymore. My hands shook as I pressed the letter to my chest. The smell of old paper and cedar filled the air, and for the first time since leaving Marigold Bay, I cried without holding back. He had known. Somehow, he'd known that one day our family would face something like this, that I would be standing alone, uncertain, afraid, but still standing. I reached back into the envelope and found a small strip of tape folded over a key. I turned it in my palm, silver, with a number etched on it. 2459B, the safety deposit box. A message from the past, waiting for this exact moment. My tears dried slowly. The ache in my chest remained, but beneath it something shifted, a quiet determination I hadn't felt in years. I looked toward the window. Outside, the fog was starting to lift over the river. The city lights reflected on the water like small stars scattered across the surface. It was still dark, but I could see the faint edge of dawn beginning to rise. I placed the letter carefully back into its envelope, then slid it into my bag. My fingers lingered on the name written across the front. Margaret. It felt like he was speaking to me through time, guiding me exactly when I needed it. Father Cole's words echoed in my mind. Your son will need you clear-headed. And now Tom's words answered him. You'll know when to act. For the first time, I felt like I did. I sat at the edge of the bed and whispered into the quiet, You're still here, aren't you? Maybe it was the flicker of the lamp or the soft sound of the wind slipping through the shutters, but for a second it felt like he was. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as something warm and real that lived inside me. The kind of love that doesn't end, it only changes form. I folded the letter once more, smoothed the edges, and tucked it beneath my pillow. When I lay down, I could still feel the faint weight of it near my heart. Somewhere between exhaustion and peace, I closed my eyes. And before I drifted into sleep, I whispered, I know now. I know what I have to do. Amelia called early the next morning. Her voice, usually firm and precise, sounded unusually tense. Margaret, I found something, she said, a name. Does Rosa Velasquez mean anything to you? The name hit me like a faint echo. Rosa. Of course. The young woman who used to clean the house every Tuesday and Friday. Always polite, always quiet, too quiet. She never met my eyes for long, but she was gentle with Ella and Lucas. They liked her. I remembered once catching her standing in the hallway, staring at Natalie's closed office door, her hands wringing the hem of her apron. When I asked if something was wrong, she'd shaken her head quickly. No, ma'am, nothing. Then she'd gone back to scrubbing the floor, her eyes red like she'd been crying. What about her? I asked. Amelia paused. She's missing. 2 months now, no official report, but I pulled some records from a database that tracks domestic worker visas. She vanished around the same time the first transfer on that USB was made. My breath caught. You think she knew something? I think she saw something, Amelia said quietly, and maybe tried to speak before she disappeared. That night we drove out to the edge of Savannah, where the city dissolved into stretches of flat land and rusted billboards. The GPS led us to a small neighborhood half hidden behind an abandoned gas station, rows of tin roof houses leaning against each other for balance. Rosa's mother lived in the last one, a faded yellow shack with a wooden cross nailed above the door. When we knocked, the door opened just a few inches. An old woman stood there, her eyes milky with cataracts, but sharp in some unspoken way. "Señora Velázquez?" Amelia asked softly. The woman nodded but didn't speak. Instead, she gestured for us to come in. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of incense and old fabric. Photos lined the walls, family portraits, most of them faded. In several, Rosa appeared, smiling shyly, her dark hair tied back with a red ribbon. "She doesn't talk," Amelia whispered, "mute since birth." The woman motioned for us to sit, then disappeared into another room. When she returned, she carried a small wooden box. Her hands trembled as she opened it and took out a single postcard. The edges were frayed, the ink smudged. She pressed it into my hand. On the front was a photograph of a beach somewhere. White sand, blue water, palm trees. On the back, just 3 words written in shaky English. "Help me, R." The date stamp was clear, 2 weeks before Natalie started working at Lane Exports. My stomach dropped. "She sent this from Marigold Bay," Amelia murmured, tracing the postmark with her finger. "Before she disappeared." The old woman tapped the card twice, then pointed toward the ceiling. Heaven, or maybe just meaning gone. Her lips moved as if she wanted to say more, but no sound came. Instead, she touched her heart, then mine. Her eyes filled with tears. I reached for her hand, holding it gently. Her skin was paper-thin, trembling. She didn't need words. I understood her perfectly. Outside, the wind carried the sound of a passing train. It felt distant, almost ghostly. I looked down at the postcard again, the words "help me," barely visible now, fading into the paper like a whisper being swallowed by time. "She tried," I said quietly. "She tried to tell someone." Amelia nodded, her face set, her jaw tight. "And maybe Natalie found out." The thought made my blood run cold. I looked at Rosa's photo on the wall again. In it, she was holding a little girl, maybe her niece, smiling despite her tired eyes. A small life. A person who vanished into nothing because she knew too much. When we stepped back outside, the air felt different, thicker, harder to breathe. The sky over the fields was turning gray and thunder rolled in the distance. I stood by the car, the postcard in my hand. The ink was smudged from the moisture in my fingers. I could still feel the tremor of Rosa's mother's touch, the silent plea in her eyes. This wasn't just about my family anymore. It wasn't just about what Natalie had done to us. It was about every name on that USB, every child and every woman who disappeared into the shadows, while people like Natalie and Cortez counted their money. I slid the postcard into my coat pocket. "We'll find out what happened to her," I said, more to myself than to Amelia. Amelia nodded, starting the car. "We will. But we have to be careful. If Natalie was tied to Lane Exports, she's not working alone." The road back to the city was silent, except for the sound of rain beginning to fall on the windshield. The world outside blurred into streaks of gray and silver. I kept my hand on the postcard the whole way back, tracing the faint letters over and over until they felt like they were carved into my skin. "Help me. R." Rosa's voice might have been silenced, but her message had found its way to me, and I wasn't going to let it disappear. The fog was still there when I came back to Marigold Bay. It always was. The kind that clings to your clothes, seeps into your bones, and hides everything just enough to make you doubt your own eyes. The town hadn't changed. The same cracked sidewalks, the same grocery sign flickering at the corner, the same silence that lived behind the shutters of every house. It felt like stepping into a memory I no longer trusted. Amelia and the officers had warned me. "You don't have to do this yourself," they said. But I insisted. Some things need to end face to face. Some ghosts only rest when you look them in the eye. So here I was again, walking the same street I once took every morning with Ella and Lucas on their way to school. Only this time, my steps were measured, deliberate. I wasn't the same woman who'd left in fear. Natalie's car was in the driveway, sleek and polished as always. The curtains were drawn, the porch light still on. I stood at the gate for a long moment before opening it. When she opened the door, her face was exactly as I remembered. Calm, soft, practiced. Her lips parted in a perfect smile. "Mom," she exclaimed, her voice high and trembling just enough to sound real. "You're back. I was so worried. Where are the kids? Are they okay?" I stepped inside, feeling the familiar warmth of the house crawl over my skin like something alive. Everything was the same. The faint smell of jasmine from her candles, the neat cushions, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Only I wasn't the same. She reached out to hug me, but I didn't move. I looked at her, really looked, and saw what I'd missed for years. The flicker of calculation in her eyes, the way her hand hesitated for just a second before touching my arm. "They're safe," I said quietly. Relief washed over her face, or at least she tried to make it look that way. "Thank God," she whispered. "I was so scared, Mom. You just disappeared. I didn't know what to do." Her voice cracked at the end, but I could tell it was practiced. I had heard that same tone before, when she lied to Daniel about where she'd been, about why she came home late, about the money that went missing. I looked her straight in the eye and said slowly, "There's somewhere you'll never reach." The smile froze on her lips. Her eyes flickered, confusion, then something sharper. "What does that mean?" she asked. I didn't answer. I walked past her, through the living room. The photograph of Daniel, her, and the kids still sat on the mantel. I picked it up, brushing a finger over Ella's tiny face, and said, almost to myself, "You really thought you could take them, didn't you?" Her voice trembled behind me. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I turned back to her, and for the first time she saw it. The calm. Not anger, not fear. Just a stillness that made her take half a step back. "Arthur found what you left in your coat," I said. "The transfer, the photo, the red circles." The color drained from her face. "That's ridiculous," she said quickly. "I don't know what you're—" "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't lie again. You've done it too long." Silence filled the room. The clock on the wall ticked, steady and cruel. She started to speak again, but this time her voice was different. Low, dangerous. "You don't know what you've done." I smiled faintly. "Actually, I do." In the next room, hidden behind the bookshelf, a small recording device blinked red. Every word, every breath, every slip of truth was being captured. The police outside were listening. She didn't know. I sat down on the couch, calm, almost tired. "You know," I said softly, "I used to think you were just lonely. Maybe that's why you lied. Why you looked for something else. But this isn't loneliness. It's greed. It's cruelty." Natalie's jaw tightened. She turned away, pacing. "You don't understand how this world works, Margaret. You think love and loyalty are enough? They're not. They never were." Her voice rose, sharp and shaking. "You and Daniel, always judging, always pretending you were better than me. You had everything handed to you. You think I was going to stay small forever?" Every word dug deeper, her mask slipping. I watched her quietly. Then, very softly, I said, "You almost sold your children." That stopped her. The words hung in the air like smoke. She turned slowly, eyes wild. "You can't prove anything." I looked toward the window where I knew the officers were parked down the street listening. I didn't need to answer. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said, voice trembling, "You'll regret this?" I stood, walked to the door, and paused. "No," I said. "I already did. For too long." And then I stepped outside. The air was cold, sharper than I remembered. The fog had thinned, but not gone. It never did in Marigold Bay. It curled around me as I walked down the path, the weight of everything finally starting to lift. Behind me, I could still hear her voice shouting something from the porch, but it no longer mattered. The moment the door closed, the officers moved in. I didn't look back. Somewhere deep in the fog, I thought I heard my husband's voice again, calm, steady, proud. "You'll know when to act." I had. The night had settled over Marigold Bay like a sheet of glass, silent, brittle, waiting to break. I sat in the unmarked car with 2 agents, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The clock on the dashboard glowed 11:47 p.m. The air inside the car was thick with tension, with the faint buzz of the receiver that connected us to the feed from Natalie's phone. Every few seconds, static crackled through the speakers, like the sound of a heartbeat. Agent Cole glanced at me from the front seat. "You okay back there, Mrs. Hayes?" I nodded. "I've been worse." He didn't reply. None of us were okay, not really. The faint hum of Natalie's voice came through the speakers. At first, I thought it was just background noise, another one of her late-night calls. But then the tone in her voice changed. Sharp, urgent. "Victor, listen," she said. "They're watching me. I can feel it. We have to leave. Tomorrow night. No delays." My spine went cold. Victor Lane. Amelia had mentioned that name before, the founder of Lane Exports, the man who'd vanished right after the first investigation started. Until now, he'd been nothing but a ghost attached to bank transfers and whispers. Cole leaned forward, adjusting the volume. "Got her," he muttered. "Keep recording." On the other end of the line, Victor's voice was low, gravelly. "The boat's ready. Silver tide. Old pier, midnight tomorrow. Bring the drive. We'll finish this offshore." The Silver Tide. I remembered that ship. Daniel used to take the kids down to the docks to watch it unload cargo when it still belonged to the fishing company years ago. It had been abandoned for nearly a decade now. "Good," Natalie said. "Once we're out, no one will ever find us. They have nothing, just rumors and that old woman's paranoia." The words hit me like a slap. That old woman. I didn't speak. I didn't even move. But my grip on the cup tightened until it crumpled in my hands. Natalie laughed softly, her tone low and cruel in a way I hadn't heard before. "If she finds out, if she's really figured it out, she won't live to see sunrise." The room went still. Even the static stopped. For a moment, it was just her voice and my heartbeat. Agent Cole swore under his breath and reached for the radio. "We have confirmation of threat. Subjects preparing to flee by water. Contact Savannah Field Office." But I wasn't listening anymore. I stared out the window into the fog that had crept back from the bay, curling through the streetlights like smoke. Somewhere out there, Natalie was sitting in that same house where my husband's picture still hung on the wall, plotting her escape, still trying to erase what she'd done, and still talking about me as if I were nothing but an obstacle to be removed. For a long time, I'd thought fear was the worst thing a person could feel. The nights I spent, running, clutching my grandchildren, wondering if every sound outside the motel was someone coming to take them. The fear of losing them, of not being believed, of being too old, too small to fight something so big. But sitting in that car, listening to her voice say those words, I realized something else. I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd already lost the illusion of safety. I'd already buried trust and love and so many pieces of myself. What was left in its place wasn't fear, it was clarity. Cole's voice came back through the haze. "We'll set up at the dock tomorrow. You won't need to go near her again." I nodded automatically, but my mind was already somewhere else, at the edge of the pier, where the fog would hang thick over the water and the sound of waves would swallow everything. Natalie thought she could outrun justice, that she could escape what she'd done to Rosa, to those children, to her own family, but she didn't understand one thing. I wasn't chasing her anymore. I was waiting. The radio hissed again and Natalie's voice returned, distant, almost lazy now. "Victor, promise me one thing. If she tries to stop us again, make sure she doesn't get another chance." Cole cursed quietly. The other agent wrote down the words, time-stamped, evidence for the case file. I just sat there and smiled faintly, the kind of smile that has no warmth, only understanding, because I finally saw her for what she really was, someone who believed she could destroy others and stay untouchable, and she had no idea that while she was planning her escape, her world was already closing in. Outside, the bay wind picked up. The waves crashed faintly against the rocks below the road, and for a moment I thought I could hear the echo of the ship's name in the distance. Silver Tide. That was where it would end. Tomorrow night. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly, letting the fear dissolve into something else. Resolve. And when I finally spoke, my voice was steady. "I used to be afraid of dying," I whispered. "Now I'm only afraid I won't be fast enough to save those kids from the memory of who their mother really is." The rain came without warning, heavy, cold, and endless. By the time we reached the old pier, the wind had already begun to howl, bending the lampposts and tossing the waves against the wooden posts like angry hands. The whole bay shimmered under a curtain of water, lights from patrol cars flashing red and blue across the slick boards. I sat in the back of the surveillance van, heart pounding against my ribs, eyes fixed on the small monitor that showed the feed from the dock. Silver Tide was there, a rusting ghost of a ship rocking gently against the current. Its paint had peeled away, leaving behind streaks of gray and salt. Natalie and Victor were just faint figures at first, running through the sheets of rain. She clutched a small black bag, probably the same one that once held the USB. Victor moved faster, looking over his shoulder every few seconds, his hand gripping a pistol. Agent Cole's voice cut through the static of the radio. "Units in position, no lights until my signal." Every muscle in my body was tense. My breath fogged the glass. When they reached the edge of the dock, Natalie turned to Victor, her hair plastered to her face, rain mixing with tears she didn't bother to wipe away. "We can still make it," she shouted over the wind. "Once we're on the boat, they'll never find us." Victor didn't answer. He was scanning the darkness, trying to spot the movement he must have sensed. Men hidden behind crates, shadows waiting to close in. Now! Cole's voice barked through the radio. The silence broke like glass. Floodlights burst on, slicing through the storm. The pier exploded with noise. Boots thudding, radios crackling, shouts in every direction. FBI agents poured out from behind containers, their flashlights cutting lines through the rain. "Drop your weapon," someone shouted. "Hands where I can see them." Victor raised the gun instead. A single flash lit up the night, followed instantly by a dozen answering ones. The echo of gunfire rolled across the bay like thunder. When it ended, Victor lay on the wet wood, the pistol still clutched in his hand, his eyes open but seeing nothing. Water pooled around him, washing away the last trace of what he'd been. Natalie froze. Her entire body trembled, not from the rain, but from shock. She dropped the bag. It hit the boards with a dull thud, scattering a few papers into the wind. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "This wasn't how it was supposed to be." I stepped out of the van before anyone could stop me. The wind hit me like a wall, but I kept walking. My shoes splashed through puddles, my coat clinging to my skin. Every step felt heavy, like wading through years of betrayal and silence. Natalie looked up when she heard my footsteps. Her face was pale under the harsh light, mascara running down her cheeks. "Mom," she said weakly, her voice small, almost like the girl she once was. "I didn't want this. I just wanted to give my kids a future." A future. That word cut through the storm louder than the thunder ever could. I stopped just a few feet away, close enough to see her hands shaking, the terror in her eyes. For a moment I saw flashes of who she used to be, the nervous young woman who entered our home with flowers and hope, and then I saw everything she'd become. My voice was calm when I spoke, almost too calm for the chaos around us. "A future built on someone else's blood," I said softly, "was never a future at all, Natalie." She stared at me, her lips trembling. For a second, I thought she might lunge forward, plead, deny. But then her shoulders dropped. Whatever she'd been holding inside finally broke. She let out a sob that sounded like the last breath of something dying. Agents moved in from behind me, their voices steady and procedural. "Hands behind your back. You're under arrest." Natalie didn't fight. She just stood there, her face tilted toward the rain, as if she wanted it to wash her clean, but some stains don't fade. I turned away as they led her past me. Her wrists glimmered under the handcuffs, small and fragile. She didn't look back. Neither did I. The storm was easing now. The floodlights dimmed. The Silver Tide creaked softly against the dock, its ropes tightening and loosening with the waves, like the ship itself was exhaling. I stood at the edge of the pier, staring into the black water. My reflection blurred with every ripple, every raindrop. Somewhere out there, beneath the dark surface, lay the final remnants of the life we once had, our laughter, our dinners, our quiet illusions. Behind me, the agents were still moving, cataloging evidence, taking photos, shouting into radios, but their voices faded into the distance, swallowed by the steady rhythm of the rain. I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift, not completely, not in joy, but in the quiet certainty that the storm had finally passed. Lightning tore through the sky, splitting the clouds with a blinding flash. For that single second, everything was white, the ship, the dock, even Victor's body gleaming like a ghost. When the thunder followed, rolling deep and low over the water, I whispered to no one but myself, "It's over." And I knew it was true. The courtroom was cold, the kind of cold that doesn't come from air conditioning but from truth. Too sharp, too raw, slicing through every word spoken. Bright white light flooded the room. The walls were bare, the windows sealed. At the center stood Natalie, her wrists cuffed loosely in front of her, her face pale and bare of makeup. She looked smaller somehow, her confidence stripped away with the layers of pretense. Daniel sat beside me, his hands clasped so tight his knuckles had turned white. He hadn't said a word since the hearing began. Every time the prosecutor spoke her name, his shoulders twitched, as if each syllable were a blade cutting deeper. On the large screen behind the judge, the evidence rolled. Images, transaction logs, video clips pulled from the USB. Each one was a window into the dark machinery of Lane Exports. Names, numbers, faces, children. Every new slide brought a murmur through the room. I saw Daniel's jaw tighten, his eyes glistening. When the photo of Rosa appeared, smiling, unaware of what was coming, he flinched. Natalie stared at the screen, then at her hands. Her lips trembled. When her lawyer finally stood, his voice was steady, practiced. Your Honor, my client was manipulated, threatened by Victor Lane. She acted under duress. She feared for her life and her children's safety. Then Natalie spoke, her voice breaking halfway through the sentence. I didn't want to hurt anyone. He said if I didn't help, he'd kill me. I was just trying to survive. Her words hung in the air, thin and hollow. Amelia stood next, calm, clear, unshakable. Survival doesn't sign a contract. Fear doesn't wire millions through hidden accounts, and no one forces you to build an empire on the backs of others. The silence that followed was heavy enough to make the judge lower his gaze for a moment. Even the jury seemed to hold their breath. When the verdict came, the words were simple but final. Natalie Brooks, for charges of trafficking, conspiracy, and fraud, you are sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. Victor Lane, life imprisonment without parole. The sound of the gavel struck once, twice, sharp, echoing through the courtroom like the closing of a door. Daniel fell to his knees beside me, his breath catching. I reached for him, my arms steady, my voice soft. Daniel, look at me, I whispered. You didn't fail, none of us did. He shook his head, tears mixing with the grief he hadn't been able to release for months. Mom, how do we come back from this? I brushed his hair back, the way I used to when he was little. We don't go back, I said. We start again. That's what your father would have wanted. He nodded slowly, eyes distant. Around us, people were gathering their files, closing laptops, stepping into the next case like this one had just been another story. But to us, it was the only one that mattered. Natalie was being led away, her hands behind her back. For a brief moment, she turned. Our eyes met. I didn't see defiance anymore, just emptiness, the kind that comes when the lies finally stop holding you up. I didn't hate her. I couldn't. Hate was heavy, and I was tired of carrying it. The judge's gavel struck one final time. Bang. And for me, that sound wasn't victory. It was the slow, measured heartbeat of justice, cold, necessary, and mercifully real. A year had passed. The sea outside St. Helena shimmered under the morning light, soft and endless. Every wave that reached the shore seemed to whisper the same quiet truth. Life goes on. The church had let me use one of the small rooms overlooking the ocean. It wasn't much. White walls, old wooden desks, sunlight streaming through the stained glass. But it was enough. Enough for laughter, for pencils scratching on paper, for small voices reading out loud. That was all I needed. The sign on the door read, Free Literacy Class, all ages welcome. Some days fishermen came by after their shifts, salt still in their hair. Some days mothers brought their children to learn letters and stories. And every day, Ella and Lucas sat in the front row. They had grown taller. Ella now drew everywhere she could, walls, notebooks, napkins. Lucas had a habit of humming when he read, as if turning the words into songs made them easier to hold on to. This morning, while the others practiced their writing, Ella came up to me with a new drawing. Grandma, she said, smiling shyly. Look. It was a watercolor painting, bright, soft, full of love. A red-roofed house by the sea, with 3 figures standing in front. Me, Daniel, and Lucas. The sky was blue, the grass full of flowers, but I noticed what wasn't there. There was no 4th figure, no mother. I looked at Ella. She was watching me carefully, as if waiting for an answer she already half knew. I smiled and traced my finger gently over the paper. That's beautiful, sweetheart, I said. Where's your mom? Ella thought for a moment, then shrugged. I don't know. I didn't draw her because I don't know what she looks like when she's good again. My chest tightened. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Maybe that's all right, I said softly, because right now, your mom is somewhere far away, learning how to be better, learning how to be someone you can draw again someday. Ella nodded, her eyes serious beyond her years. Then she smiled and ran back to her desk, humming under her breath. Outside, the wind picked up. The ocean breeze slipped through the open windows, carrying the faint sound of the church bells from the tower above. The chimes mixed with the laughter of the children, and for the first time, the sound didn't echo with grief. It sounded like grace. When the class ended, I stayed behind, cleaning up the crayons and folded drawings left on the desks. The light was golden now, the kind that comes just before sunset. On the far wall, a painting hung above the chalkboard, Rosa Velázquez's portrait. Amelia had found it in her mother's house and given it to me. Beneath it, a small brass plate read, "For those who were silenced, and for those who learned to speak again." I sat at the teacher's desk, the same spot where I used to sit decades ago, before life became tangled with loss and fear. I opened my old leather journal, its pages now filled with small notes, names, and lessons from this new chapter of my life. I began to write. It's been a year since the storm passed. The house in Marigold Bay stands empty now, but I visit sometimes. The fog still lingers, but it no longer frightens me. Daniel teaches again, and the children laugh more easily. We still speak of her, not as a monster, but as a mother lost in her own darkness. I don't hate her. Hate ends stories. Forgiveness lets them continue. I didn't win anything. There are no victories here, no trophies to hold. I only took back 2 small souls from the hands of the dark. That is enough. I closed the journal. Through the window, I could see Ella chasing Lucas down the sand, their laughter rising above the wind. The red kite they carried flew higher and higher until it was just a dot against the blue. I leaned back in my chair and let the sound of the sea fill the room, the rhythm steady, eternal. It reminded me of the sound the waves made the night I picked up that coat. How something small had changed everything. Maybe that was life. One small act, one truth uncovered, and the ripples that follow forever. I looked out at the horizon and whispered, almost like a prayer, if there's anything left from that coat, it's this lesson. Truth may take everything from us, but it's the only thing that can lead us out of the dark.